So you might be wondering, how many archetypes are there? What is an archetype? What's going on? At first, I'm sure it can be confusing when diving into Jung and his, kind of seemingly mystical ideas. But not to fear, in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to know so you can conceptualize and understand how many archetypes there are and what's going on there. So first of all, before we tackle the question of how many archetypes there are, we have to understand what an archetype is. Because if you don't know what it is, then how do you know how many of them there are? So let's get into that. So basically, the word archetype is broken down into two words. It's archen, which means original or old, and typos, which means pattern, model, or type. So archetype stands for the original pattern. That's what it means, okay? And so, and those are roots from Greek words, okay? And so archetype means original pattern. And originally Jung conceptualized this concept using the phrase primordial image. But because of the word image, I think it confused a lot of people. So he changed it from the word primordial image to the word archetype, okay? And so another way to conceptualize it is patterns, original categories, or patterns of the mind. Another way to formulate it would be the original forms of the mind, or the original forms of the psyche, okay? Now, or another way to think of it is structures that make up the fundamental units of the psyche, kind of like a matrix of the psyche, the fundamental units that make up what we perceive to be the psyche or the mind, all right? And so there are different ways to conceptualize it. Now, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about another way to conceptualize it. You could also conceptualize the archetypes as personalities. Now, what is a personality? Okay, a personality is kind of made up of lots of different narratives or stories, okay? Because a personality is manifested behaviors, you could say, but you can't just point to one action and say that one action is the personality, but it's the sequence of actions, so a narrative or a story that create up the what we would call a personality. So you could think of these primordial images as or primordial patterns as personalities as well. That's a good way to think of it as well, as a personality. Okay, so when we get into talking about this archetype and that archetype, when you personify an archetype, it helps you conceptualize what that archetype is and how and the characteristics of that archetype and how that archetype kind of plays out in someone's life. You see? So that's another way to conceptualize archetypes. Okay, so we've got a few different ways to kind of think about it because it is a hard concept to understand originally. Now, I'm going to shift gears again and talk about the archetype in a different way. What will help you to understand what an archetype is understanding it through the lens of, for example, Darwinian evolution. Okay, so just as our bodies have evolved across time, so the mind has evolved across time. Okay, and just as we all have a personal body, I have my body here, you've got your body wherever you are, and our bodies are slightly different, but we share a general pattern. We share a human pattern. See, we both have a heart, we both have eyes, we both have arms and legs, right? And particularly, we both have human body parts. We share in the pattern of a human bodily structure, okay? Now, and this body has evolved across time, you see, to become what it is today. Now, we share in that same structure, okay? It's beyond my individual body. We actually share in that superstructure kind of thing, okay? And so that the transpersonal structure is what I'm trying to say. Now, it's the same as the mind. The mind, we share in a transpersonal mind. That's what Jung's indicating when he's talking about the collective unconscious, okay? It's a transpersonal mind. It's the same as if we have a blueprint, a pattern for the body that we share in. We also have a blueprint and a pattern for the mind that we share in. That's what the collective unconscious is, and the archetypes are the fundamental units of the collective unconscious that manifest themselves in patterns of behavior. So we could call them something like a personality, okay? Who live out kind of narrative structures, all right? And so that's what an archetype is, and that's a good way to conceptualize it through the history of evolution. You know, I've heard that some people refer to Carl Jung as Darwin of the mind, okay? And I think that's a good kind of little thing to hold on to remember when you're thinking about Jung's conceptualization of the archetypes, all right? Okay, so I'm going to read out this quote by Jung, and I think that this will also help you conceptualize more about what the archetypes are, okay? So if the assertion is made that our imagination, perception, and thinking are likewise influenced by inborn and universally present formal elements, it seems to me that a normally functioning intelligence can discover in this idea just as much or just as little mysticism as in the theory of instincts. Although this approach of mysticism has frequently been leveled at my concept, I must emphasize yet again that the concept of the collective unconscious is neither a speculative nor a philosophical, but an empirical matter. The question is simply this: are there or are there not unconscious universal forms of this kind? Okay, so basically what I want to highlight there is, if you really think about it, if you think about that conception of Darwinian evolution, but applying that to the mind, all it is the question of empiricism, because it's just how the mind kind of evolved across time, and these are just the original patterns of the mind. That's all it is. So it's not mystical. It's nothing, there's nothing mystical about it, really. It's just that it's hard for us to come to grips with the fact that our mind wasn't always the way it is now. The same as our body wasn't always the way it is now, okay? So Jung's just hinting at the primordial or original, patterns of the mind, okay? And so now I want to end on this quote, and this quote answers the question that you clicked on this video for. How many archetypes are there? So here's a quote by Jung. There are as many archetypes as there are typical situations in life. Endless repetition has engraved these experiences into our psychic constitution, not in the form of images filled with content, but at first only as forms without content, representing merely the possibility of a certain type of perception and action. When a situation occurs which corresponds to a given archetype, that archetype becomes activated and a compulsiveness appears, which, like an instinctual drive, gains its way against all reason and will, or else produces a conflict of pathological dimensions, that is to say, a neurosis. So you see there that there could be thousands upon thousands of many archetypes. There is as many archetypes as there are typical situations in life. Okay, so across evolutionary history, as beings who have encountered different situations, right? There's these different narrative structures that have built up in us, and so then there are different kind of instincts of the mind that have developed into patterns of mind that then have endured across time. And so the answer to the question is there's a lot. And there could be maybe infinite amount of archetypes, so to speak. But I mean, it depends what you think about the ultimate reality of the universe, because maybe there's not such thing as the infinite. I'm not completely sure mathematically. I don't know. But again, we have to ground it in typical situations in life. So it's not like it's just anything is an archetype. It's there are as many archetypes as there are typical situations in life. So, maybe there are slight variants which would make it infinite technically, but maybe you could clump those slight variants into a typical situation. So, they were slightly different, but they come under the same category. Therefore, there's probably, millions of archetypes, so to speak. But there might be more than that technically, but you can see them as the same, under the same archetype, because they come under the same situation. And of course, there's more situations. Some situations are more typical than others. So some archetypes would be more, typical than others as well. You see, more readily noticeable than others, because that situation occurs more often. For example, let's take just a simple example of you got a young man who sees a beautiful young woman for the first time, and she's extremely beautiful. He sees her pass him in the park as she walks along. Now, let's say he's captured by her beauty straight away, absolutely captured. That is an example of the archetype of the anima, what Jung calls the anima. That particular archetype is the female in the male, okay? Or the feminine in the masculine. And so he is projecting from himself, from his psychology, onto her that feminine that feminine part that he's longing for within himself. And so he projects that onto her and doesn't see her, the person, the particular person. He sees the archetypal person, and that's why he's so drawn to her, because these archetypes, because they're so primordial, they're so connected and rooted to our emotions. And so they give us a lot of emotional life, so to speak. So you can see that's an example of a typical situation that then activates an archetype, okay? And so that's what Jung's talking about here. And so we don't get a neurosis, which is an incongruency between the unconscious archetypal forces and our conscious mind. We have to become conscious of these archetypes that are trying to manifest in our life, and we have to try to integrate them in our life so we can live them out in such a way where we're capturing the life essence or the emotional vitality that comes from these archetypal forms that are manifesting themselves as narratives throughout our life as we develop our personality throughout our life, okay? So I hope that explains that there. So how many archetypes are there? There are as many archetypes as there are typical situations in life. That's the answer. So thanks for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe. Please share it with other people on social media. That really helps me. Please give me a comment, even if just to say, hey, what's up? How you going? Just say something, because that helps my channel as well. Thanks for watching. I'll be releasing heaps more videos on Carl Jung, so stick around. and I'll see you in the next one.